Hello and welcome to the Success Showcase. I'm your host, Eric Lopkin from the Modern Observer Group. And with me, as always, is Chip Janiszewski from the Happiness and Success GPS. Chip, how you doing this week?
Doing great, Eric. How are you? Happy Monday.
Happy Monday. We're doing fantastic here. We're heading out into the end of January, and
Yay.
2019 has been very busy so far. And I hope all of our listeners are having a busy and successful 2019 so far as well. Today, we're going to talk about a process that I've been using, and I call it pace yourself. And it's very simple, but it's 4 elements. P is planning, A is action, C is communication, and E is enjoyment. And we put this together primarily to remind people that they do have to keep moving on to the next stage. We start with planning, which is very important, but it's also important not to get stuck in analysis paralysis. So you do have to move on to actual action. And then once you're underway, you have to let people know what's going on. If nobody knows you exist, then they're not going to come buy your products or services. So you have to communicate. And the E is to enjoy your success. People have a hard time seeing themselves as successful. So we're going to talk about this, and we'll start with planning. And over the last several months, we've talked a lot about planning. We've talked about business plans. We've talked about personal growth plans. We've talked about marketing plans. Planning is important. You wouldn't build a house without a blueprint. Why would you try to build a business or a career without one? So we'll start off talking about briefly summarizing what we've already talked about in how to plan for all of these things. And of course, the first part of any plan is to figure out where you're going. What are your goals? So we've talked about having, smart goals. And Chip, I know you're very big on SMART goals. Why don't you remind our listeners what SMART stands for?
SMART goals. The S stands for specific. You got to have a specific goal. And then the M is for measurable. You have to be able to measure your progress on that. The A is achievable or attainable. It's got to be realistic. And the R is the reasonable, realistic part of it. And then most importantly, the T is timed, because if you don't time the goal, really what you have is a dream and not a goal. So those things all have to get put together. And a great place to start, which we've talked about a lot, is with yourself. What are your virtues, your beliefs? What is your primary aim? And if you're building a business or talking about goals, they should reflect what you stand for and what you're looking to do.
Absolutely. And once you have your SMART goals, your plan should take shape around that. Your planning is how to achieve those goals. Now, if it's a personal goal, it may involve family members. It can involve, just yourself. If it's a business goal, you may have partners, you may have employees, you may even bring in your customers. But you need to put together your plan of who needs to be involved in your goal to make it successful, what resources you need to make it successful, what you need to do with those resources, and how you can take all of that and make it work.
Yeah, and we've talked a lot about chunking down big goals into smaller goals. And this is where the SMART goal really comes in, because what you're probably going to end up with is an overall goal of which you're going to have to take various steps to do that, which are going to be your smaller goals. So if you list those out, it's really, really important to put them down. We talked about measurables, so you have to have the things you're shooting for. And then you also have to have the T, that time element, as far as when you're going to get this thing accomplished by. So it's really, really important to start mapping these things out on paper or in a spreadsheet so you can track them a little bit easier or whatever you're using. But start writing these things down.
All right. And the time management part of it, the time-based part of it is very important. You need to put a deadline on your goal to make sure that you're staying on track. If you're very into project management tools, you can do this on a Gantt chart, which allows you to move your deadline back and forth and move the different parts of your plan accordingly. Personally, I hate Gantt charts. I think they make everything too complicated. You'd want to make things as easy for you to move forward as possible. But definitely write out your plan. If it's in a spreadsheet where you can change different values and follow through that way, if it's just written down on a piece of paper, that's fine, but get it down, because there is part of this that when you put the plan down, it becomes concrete. And again, it could be project management software, it could be a spreadsheet, it could just be a yellow pad with paper. However you're most comfortable getting it down.
Yeah, I really think eventually it should end up in some type of a software piece where you can sort things out and prioritize and reprioritize, especially if you're looking at something that's more complicated. One of the big traps with planning, though, you talked about getting stuck there. And what I'm talking about here is just playing with all the what ifs and having them overpower you so much that you don't do anything. I loved an action plan out of the book called The Slight Edge by Jeff Olson. I don't know if that's still out or not, but he talked about that, and he talked about action. And we've always heard of the ready, aim, shoot philosophy. And so many people get stuck in the aiming so much that they don't shoot. And what this talks about is ready, shoot, aim. And this is basically the action, communication to yourself, figuring out what went right and what went wrong. I forget the book that we talked that used this as a whole philosophy, but we reviewed this book a couple of months ago. But it's so important to get these things down, act upon it right away, gather your data, and make a plan whether to shift or whether to keep on going.
All right, you're talking about the lean startup.
Right.
And that's actually part of why we do this PACE program. Because again, the A in PACE is act. And that is big. There are so many people that have grand ideas and they research them and they plan them, but they get analysis paralysis and they never move forward. So if you're really going to succeed at something, you have to act. And that's the second part of PACE. Take action, follow through. It also means that you're going to have to look at your planning and see if it was realistic as you move forward. As we talked about with the lean startup, it's about taking action, seeing the results, and then deciding, okay, is the rest of the plan going to work based on these results? If yes, great, keep moving forward. If not, take a step back and pivot. Figure out what will work and then take that action. But don't spend a lot of time reanalyzing. Once you've gotten your initial plan down, action is the key. So you want to be taking action. Putting a project together, putting a product or service together, figuring out exactly how to move forward and moving forward.
No, and part of the planning process can be, if you're working obviously with a business, you have your team with you. But if you're doing something on your own, it's not a bad idea to get a few people to maybe mastermind with, to hold you accountable for things going on, to go through the action process and the analysis process to see if you do need to pivot or to keep going on things. So, but the bottom line is there aren't too many successful people out there who got there all by themselves. You need a team with you.
That's absolutely true. And it doesn't necessarily need to be a partnership. It could be a mentor who's helping you. It could be a peer group. It could just be a bunch of friends who you all have your own projects, but you get together periodically to help each other out.
That's a great part of the M in SMART goals, the measurable. If you're doing that with a group of people, you're really holding each other accountable there too, which is great. And also the timing of things.
Absolutely. And as we talked about with the lean startup, pivot fast if you have to. There is something called the commander's intent in military operations, and it is based on the idea that no plan survives contact with the enemy. So when the commander puts together a plan, the people who are implementing it have to understand the commander's intent, because that's what has to be achieved. That's what they're acting on. The individual steps that they put together in the plan, they may not work once you hit the battlefield, once you hit the action part of your startup. So you need to understand what that ultimate goal is, what that SMART goal was. In this case, the commander's intent, and that is what you focus on. The where you are going, the what you are trying to achieve becomes more important than how you get there. So if you have to pivot and change direction, you do so.
Yeah, I mean, to me, intent, it's kind of like synonymous with the goal in the first place. It could be one of those chunked down goals that you're looking to accomplish to achieve the major goal overall. But that commander's intent is really, I love that analogy. I had not heard that one before, but it makes a whole lot of sense.
Yeah, I mean, in military operations, the commander's intent is the ultimate goal that the platoon is trying to accomplish. And they understand that, if intelligence is wrong and suddenly you're dealing with twice as many enemy troops coming up, or they're coming from a different direction than was anticipated, you have to be able to adapt to that on the battlefield. You can't retreat, replan, and then come back. You don't have that kind of time. In business, it's the same thing. You can't retrench every time something changes. A new piece of technology can change the entire landscape for you. A competitor may beat you to market. So now you have to go, well, it's not good enough to do this. We have to do them one better. There's not the time in a fast moving operation to go back and replan. So that's where the pivot and a lot of what we talked about with the lean startup comes in, because you have to look at the information, judge how that affects how you're going to get to your goal, make any adjustments you need to do on the fly, move forward, do the same thing again. If it's working, keep going. If not, figure out how you have to pivot again, but always keep that goal in mind.
Yeah, we talked about, again, working with others on this. And I would imagine, again, you're just introducing this pace yourself to me today, but I would imagine that part of this process when you're working with other people is the C for communication.
Yes, and that is a very important part, especially for a solopreneur. If you're working alone, you know what you're thinking. But if you can't communicate that to someone else, you're not going to have customers because they're not going to understand what you're doing. You're not going to be able to convince partners to come on board because they're not going to understand. That understanding is key. Communicating what you are doing is very important. And sometimes, if what you're doing is so different, you may actually need to build a mock up so that people can see and understand. But communication is very important because it's not just about you. We talked about needing resources to achieve your goal. So you're going to have to communicate to suppliers what it is you need. If there are other skills that you don't have that you're bringing people in, either as a partner or as a vendor, you need to be able to communicate what your plan is. Communication is very important.
Especially the bigger the project is, the more likely you're going to need financing and outside resources for that also. And obviously, you're going to have a very, very good plan put together and be able to communicate it to your possible sources for funding and that kind of thing.
Right. And sometimes just what you had for a plan is not sufficient because you understand what the plan says, but someone else might not. When my partner and I launched Support Info Go, nobody had ever done this before. Now, we thought it was a very simple concept. It's a calendar of support groups, of drug presentations, but at its heart, it's just an event calendar. So we thought, okay, well, that's simple. But because nobody had done it before, people did not understand what we were talking about. They thought we were talking about putting together events, and this would be a calendar of our events rather than a calendar of everybody's events. There were a number of people that just did not understand. So we would take out a tablet, call up the website, and actually show them. And when they saw it, then they understood. So you may need to go beyond what's written in your plan to an actual mock up, possibly a prototype if you're doing a product. But you have to do whatever it takes to get other people to understand what it is you're offering, what you need from them, or what you're providing them.
Yeah. And obviously, using digital communications, videos, and that kind of thing is a really, really great way to get your point across. And it's something that you may want to test behind the scenes with the people you're working with, putting it together and asking them if they do understand this before you put that out there. But putting together a website or a presentation that has videos on that to explain what's going on for a reference point for training and other purposes that you may run into is really, really important. And that's a really big advantage of being in the age that we're in right now.
All right, videos are a fantastic tool. And something to remember when using a video is that you don't necessarily have to have a working product. You can just do the video so that it looks like it's a working product, so that they understand what it's going to look like to the end user. Think of it in terms of making a movie. Star Wars, the Avengers, nobody actually built the spaceships. Nobody actually built a flying suit of armor. But on video, you can make it look like it works. You can do the same thing with your product or your service. You don't actually have to build it and then video it. You can use video magic to make it look like it's complete. And what you're actually completing is just a front end.
Yeah, which if you are inventing or reinventing a process or a product or so on and so forth, that's a great thing to do before you actually spend the money to make what you want to happen in the first place. Because if you can get reactions and figure out that it's not the way to go, or you need to go a different way up front before investing all kinds of resources in something that's not going to work, it's a great advantage to be able to use this technology up front to accomplish that.
All right, when doing software programming, for example, most prototypes don't actually work. They just simulate what it is they're going to do. And there could be on the back end a very limited number of choices that are going to work. I know a lot of software, especially search engines and directories and things like that, they're prototypes, They didn't actually have the software do anything. So they had somebody put in a search function, and then a person on the back end actually did the work and made it look like the computer did it. When you're putting together something to help communicate, that's fine. You don't need to have that final product. You just need to make it look like it will. This is what we're reaching for. And using video, especially, is very useful for people because they can understand it more if they see it happening.
Seeing is believing. So enjoyment. Obviously, you have to be doing this for some reason rather than to just get it done. And obviously, this is one of the things that I like the most, because if you feel accomplished in doing what you're doing and you've gone through the blood, sweat, and tears of that, it's time to celebrate and enjoy not only the process, but your accomplishments when you've done that.
Absolutely. The E in PACE is enjoy. And it's for you to enjoy your success. And it's not just the ultimate success. You need to enjoy all the little successes on the way. Every step you take is a success. Every time you move forward, you make a new partnership, you get a little further on the product. Every time you meet one of those interim goals, those are all successes. And it is very important for your mindset to enjoy those little successes. Because when you look at the big project, it can be overwhelming. But when you enjoy each little success, each little step, it propels you forward.
Yeah,
Could you
has a lot to do with your mindset too, which we talk about a lot. I mean, there's two different ways you can look at everything, and if you can have that little pregnant pause when something happens and treat things in a positive sense, it's a great way to enjoy the whole process.
all right. Can you imagine what SpaceX would be like if they didn't enjoy every success? Their goal is to put somebody on the moon. Well, they've been going for years, they haven't gotten there yet. And when you're talking about that kind of long term project, focusing only on the end can be very depressing because everything you're doing, it's like, well, yes, but we're not there yet. But we're not there yet. But take a look at the successes they've had. One, getting the rockets, reusable rockets off the ground. Two, getting them to land so they can be reused. This has never been done before the way they did it. So every time they take another step forward, every time they have a successful launch, every time they send something up that docks with the International Space Station, they enjoy every one of those little successes, even though it's not their ultimate goal, because everyone moves them forward. And that is so important. You have to keep moving forward. And your mindset, your attitude is so important to that. You need to realize what you've already accomplished and enjoy that. So when you put all of that together, that's what we call PACE. So it's plan, act, communicate, enjoy. And it really is done in that order, even though there's a little bit of overlap in certain parts of it. Certainly, when you have to pivot, you go a little bit back to plan while you're acting. Communication, while you're acting, goes first. The two generally go hand in hand so that you're communicating what you're doing. And you should be enjoying it all along, but most of all at the end when you've really got it down. So when you pace yourself, it's a reminder not to get stuck in any one stage. As I said earlier, there are so many people that have great ideas, but they never act on them. They just keep planning and planning. Well, an idea is only an idea until you act on it. And we said, you can't do this all on your own. So you have to be able to communicate what you're doing with others. Certainly, the people who are helping you build it. But once you've got your product or service ready, you need to be able to market it. You need to be able to communicate to the folks outside why they need this, what this is going to do for them.
Yeah, and also get their feedback too of the customers that you're working with out there. That's a huge part of communications.
Absolutely. You always want to be getting feedback. The feedback is one of the ways you know if you have to pivot. So even though all of these stages meld together at points, it's important to move from one to the next to keep the progress going. So that's pace yourself. So we're coming up on the end of our time. So, Chip, what do you think is the big takeaway for our listeners about pacing themselves?
To me, I just love the analogy pace. Plan, act, communicate, enjoy. It's a great template for handling your process from strategic planning through implementation to celebrating your success.
Exactly. I think the big takeaway for me is not to get stuck in any one segment. It all has to work together. You move from one to the other and keep moving forward. That's very important. If you stop moving forward, you don't reach your goal. So pace yourself to get to your goal. You've been listening to the Success Showcase. You can catch us every week at xvadio.com/podcasts. You can also find us on the Apple Podcasts app, the iTunes Store, Spotify, iHeartRadio app, and wherever you find podcasts. Remember, make this your best week ever and make next week even better. See you then.